Good day, my co-students, especially to our instructor, Mr. Martin Rebel. Today, I will be reporting our Lesson 20, which is the discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression, or Sogie in the Philippines. So let's begin with the introduction. The Universal Policy. Article 2, page 1, 3, and 26 of the Convention provide the respect, equality, and non-discrimination of all individuals on the grounds of inter alia, race, color, and sex. In the landmark decision of Tonin from Australia in 1994, it is found not only that the reference to sex in Article 2, page 1, is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, guarantee of equal application of covenant rights, and Article 26 is the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, means the right to non-discrimination. Must be taken to include sexual orientation, but also that laws which criminalize consensual homosexual acts expressly violate the privacy protection of the law. For further elaboration with the decision, Nicholas Tonen claimed that the Domestic Criminal Code was discriminatory and contrary to Articles 2, page 1 and 26 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, or ICCPR. Tonin submitted that he was subject to direct de jure discrimination because the law distinguished between individuals in the exercise of the right to privacy on the basis of sexual activity, sexual orientation, and sexual identity. Tonin submitted that in order to remedy the discriminatory provisions, they had to be repealed. Thus, by reading the meaning of sexual orientation into the prohibited ground of sex in Articles 26 and 2, page 1, the criminal provisions were clearly in violation. So let's proceed with the national and local policies. In the past 12 months alone, the committee has called upon states on 5 occasions to take positive steps to end national prejudice and discrimination against lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender or LGBT people. So, LGUs from the different cities all over the Philippines have been proactive in passing and filing city ordinances banning LGBT discrimination. Presently, the anti-discriminatory bill is still pending before the Congress. This bill is expected to be signed into law before the end of the Duterte administration. Prior to this bill, several LGUs have enacted ordinances and resolutions to address these issues. The anti-discrimination bill seeks to prohibit and penalize a wide range of discriminatory policies and practices against Filipino LGBT persons in schools, workplaces, commercial establishments, public service, health institutions, police, and the military. Comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation is a vital part of adequate protection of the LGBT community that covers sexual orientation and gender identity as well as race, religion, ethnicity, and other statuses. In the House of Representative Raymond Palatino of the Kabataan Party List filed House Resolution Number 1333, which seeks to investigate prejudicial, discriminatory, and unjust practices and policies against LGBT students implemented and tolerated in schools, partnering with the DepEd and other government agencies to explore the inclusion of a comprehensive gender curriculum on basic and secondary education and in vocational and technical school incorporate discussion on issues of LGBT persons. The state should prioritize passage of a comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation pending in Congress that includes protection of LGBT persons in the Philippines as a way to prevent harassment, discrimination, or violence against persons because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Despite the passage of these government actions addressing LGBT violence and discrimination, the state has failed to address the overwhelming amount of hate, crimes, and murders of LGBT individuals in the Philippines. Example, the state submitted this to the Committee for the Philippines for periodic review of LGBT killings that have occurred in recent years within the state, nor the fact that the number of hate crimes is continually increasing. The report discussed proposed anti-discrimination legislation but failed to discuss the importance of including LGBT people in the legislation. Furthermore, as mentioned earlier, anti-discrimination legislation for LGBT persons was introduced 12 years ago and is still pending in Congress. In May of 2012, the DepEd issued DepEd Order No. 40 or the DepEd Child Protection Policy to guarantee the protection of children in schools from any form of violence, abuse, or exploitation regardless of sexual orientation and gender identity. Widespread and systematic human rights violations on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, and homosexuality persist in the Philippines. The arrest, harassment, and discrimination faced by the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender or LGBT people in the Philippines demonstrate the urgent need for the government of the Philippines to act. LGBT persons are entitled to their full rights under the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, or ICCPR. In order to protect access and enjoyment of these rights, the government of the Philippines must take positive steps to repel discriminatory laws and combat violence targeted at LGBT individuals. There is urgent need for the committee to take appropriate action to ensure LGBT people can enjoy the rights within the convention to which they are entitled. This is the end of my report. The next reporter is Jobel Guanedo. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. Also to our instructor, Sir Markim A. Rivel. Good day, sir. So, I will be discussing the effect of state discrimination in society. So, the state's treatment of LGBT intensifies discrimination on the basis of Sogie within Philippine society and social institution. So, being young and not conforming to the gender rules assigned to one sex increases the risk of discrimination and abuse for LGBT persons. This victimization is aggravated by the absence of support mechanism and school policies addressing this concern, as well as the failure of schools to safeguard students from being abused by other students, staff, administrators, and teachers. The discrimination LGBT students face in schools not only violates the right to be free from discrimination but prevents these individuals from the enjoyment of numerous other rights in the covenant as well. So, a recent study on bullying in middle school showed that Filipino children have a higher rate of being made fun of by other children, 57% to 58% than school children in Australia, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Japan, Malaysia, New Zealand, Singapore, and Taiwan. 33 and a report by the Sydney Morning Herald showed that 50% of the 9-year-old Filipino children surveyed said they were bullied regularly. So, homophobia, the stigma and prejudice toward LGBT persons are very present within Filipino society, creating a dangerous climate of hostility toward LGBT people. LGBT youth are often targeted by parents who, upon discovering their child's sexual orientation and or gender identity, feel compelled to inflict physical harm to them out of frustrations or in an attempt to prevent their child from expressing their sexuality. Next is discrimination by the Catholic Church. So the Catholic Bishop Conference of the Philippines and Episcopal Commission of Family and Life has been fervently demanding Congress for the removal of sex, gender, sexual orientation, and gender identity in the comprehensive anti-discrimination ordinances filed in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, claiming that its inclusion will only create problems regarding ethics, marriage, the family, and the religious freedom, and reasons that the difference in a sex or gender does not belong to the same level as the difference in race, color, religion, or ethnicity. It is important to note the Philippines Catholic Church blatant campaign against LGBT persons and how it contributes to the rampant discrimination and violence experienced by LGBT persons in the Philippines. Antagonists of the anti-discrimination bill claim that the passage of an anti-discrimination legislation will open the door for same-sex marriages. A provision allowing for same-sex marriage was not present in the anti-discrimination bill at the time of its introduction, first filing, and have never been added. Misinformation about the inclusion of the sexual orientation and gender identity in the anti-discrimination bills are being circulated to convince legislators and society that LGBT persons are not discriminated against or abused and instead are depicting themselves as being oppressed in order to gain public sympathy. Next is the participation of the members of LGBTQ in public life. Article 25 of the Convention provides for the right of each citizen to participate in the public affairs, to vote, and to have equal access to public service in the country. These rights are provided free of unreasonable restriction and free from distinction made on the basis of sex, which, as mentioned above, includes sexual orientation. So, in the past 12 months, the committee has called upon state parties to take affirmative steps to end negative attitudes and stigma surrounding LGBT people on 10 occasions. Discrimination against of LGBT individuals' participation in election, the committee requested information regarding measures the state has taken to create an environment in which all political parties have equal rights and participatory rights in actions. One issue the committee was concerned with was the information it received the Commission on Elections or COMELEC rejected LGBT group LEDLED applications to participate in the 2010 election on the grounds of morality. Ended on November 11, 2009, the Commission on Election or the COMELEC dismissed the petition of LEDLED LGBT party list to run in the May 2010 national election, claiming that LEDLED promotes immorality and a threat to the moral and spiritual degradation of the youth. Then, the decision of the Comelec clearly shows how state actors with personal religious homophobic biases discriminate and abuse the basic human right of LGBT persons. At the same time, the decision of the Supreme Court recognizes that the LGBT sector's right to association and expression and the right to participate freely in which sets a legal precedent for the recognition of the LGBT as a sector. The next is the discrimination in the military. Through their media announcement, it seems on the surface that the Philippine military and the police are adhering to the non-discrimination clause of the Philippine Constitution, Article 2, and the ICCPR by its declaration of openness to admit gays, lesbian, and bisexual persons in military and police service. Furthermore, the PMA publicly admitted that even though they do not prohibited gays in their military school, having gays was not yet quite accepted in the PMA. As it is the Filipino culture, gays are not yet very acceptable outright. Upon closer inspection, the additional condition required from gays, lesbian and bisexual applicants and cadets demonstrate lingering prejudices and negative stereotypes towards LGBT persons. Also, the military's apparent strict adherence exclusively towards heterosexes, gender binary, masculine and feminine. Rules discriminate against those that fall short to this standard and are considered as the benchmark of what constitution being decent, proper, and respectful. So, cadets who display effeminate or gay behavior, which is against the code of conduct of the police and armed forces, will be punished either with a reprimand and or the dishonorable discharge. It also noteworthy that transgender persons were not invited to join the military nor the police. If the AFP, PNP, and the PMA are serious in their non-discriminatory position, they should open their invitation to transgender persons to join the military and the police, and they should formalize their non-discriminatory position by revising their respective code of ethics, making it illegal to discriminate persons who enter military and police service regardless of one's sexual orientation and gender identity. The generalized negative stereotyping of LGBT persons and the misconception that a person's sexual orientation defines one's gender expression are most evident on the common position of the APF, PNA, and PMA towards gays and effeminate behavior. The identification of sources of discrimination is vital so that you will know how these acts are committed or performed by the social institutions, their respective actors. The unified output can result to a class, program, or activity addressing this concern. Then the summary. Discrimination of people based on the Sogie is widespread in the Philippines. International and local policies are in place to address this prevailing issue. Yet, some institutions still spread to ill issue. So what is clear is that everyone, including students, must act to resolve the issue. So that would be all in our report. So thank you and God bless.